ready to go.
Let's just hard do the introductions because we tend to
Hard
forget.
do it.
We're gonna welcome to hard contesting wrestling.
You're gonna do it hard, right?
The extra hard version of the podcast that does. I'm gonna.
Remember, hitting is just hard touching.
It is.
Where did that come from?
I have no idea.
I feel like that was a thing that we came up with when we were super high and when we were like 16, and it's just lasted 20 years. And then, you know what?
You probably said it first, Evan.
And I can't tell if that was complimentary or derisive. No, I know.
You're the funny one.
joking.
It's all right.
Oh God, what a burden. That was why I stopped doing comedy, because it turned out that taking my knowledge that I'm like a funny person that, you know, generally people like to be around, and then plugging that into the like career like artist goal part of my brain just generated an amount of anxiety that I could not mitigate.
Anytime you take something you enjoy and make it your job, there's this danger that you're going to end up hating
Yeah,
it.
exactly. That's why this podcast works, because I don't enjoy wrestling. Right? That's what.
Right, that's the whole point.
So it's not like it's ruining something I enjoyed previously.
Even if you come to enjoy wrestling, it'll always be tied in your mind to the podcast.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And for me, you do most of like the technical work when it comes to the podcast. So it doesn't, I just have to show up and fucking watch matches and talk about shit.
You are our Instagram master, so I think that's an
Insta.
important. You create the images for the podcast. So that's big. Speaking of the podcast that is this podcast that you are listening to Contesting Wrestling, the podcast where we talk about the things that fans love and that other people don't so much care for when it comes to the world's most popular form of simulated combat. My name is Evan Burke. I used to be a writer, and now I spend all my time editing episodes of this podcast, so I haven't written anything in a long time. But it's great. It's very rewarding. And I spend the rest of my time watching wrestling. I still don't care for a lot of it, so it's difficult for me emotionally, physically, in terms of my life. In some ways, it's good for my relationship. In other ways, it's putting a real strain on my marriage. So,
I was already finding the way of the wrestling fan. Not liking most of it and letting it be a strain on his life.
They say, talking about the significant others, that they really like wrestling, or that they enjoy it watching it with you, at least at first. Then you get a few years in, and that starts to change.
I will say So Laura actually really enjoyed. She was a fan of wrestling when she was a kid, in a way that I never was. And I would say when we watch a good match together, she's enjoyed about the same number of matches that I've had, which at this point is 6 out of about 50. So it's we're going.
Yep. Otherwise, my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in the wrestling business for well over 10 years now. I do wrestling, I do commentary, I do ring announcing. I've done a little bit of everything, and now I'm doing this podcast, and it's just great. Professor.
I am Dr. Ben Abelson, professor of philosophy at Mercy College.
Mercy.
What is that?
Dude love.
Dude love. Yeah, that's right.
Have mercy.
Have mercy.
You ever see The Loved One?
I've seen parts of it. I've never seen the whole Loved One.
I got it on VHS once. Someone was bootlegging it. They are all so drunk.
You know what? I think we did.
I think we watched it once late at night. Yeah.
It didn't really make that much of an impression, actually.
They were so drunk.
And we probably were too, among other things.
Yeah.
Today, we are entering into the world of AJ Lee.
That's right. So we are examining the career of AJ Lee, who really represents this transitional stage in women's wrestling, in the WWE at least, when it's coming out of the complete dark ages into what has been called the women's revolution, or the revitalization of women's wrestling.
I will say my general impression of AJ Lee over the matches that we've watched, which we'll get into the details in a second. My general impression is that she is somebody who they were still really trying to force her into these tropey boxes, still trying to get her to sort of do the same thing, and she was just too fucking good and just broke through, what was the
like a weed, like grass that grows out of the middle of a concrete sidewalk through a crack.
Yeah, exactly. Just cannot be constrained, and I would imagine sort of broke some of these barriers in a way that really paved the way for a lot of the great recent women's wrestling that we've seen.
Yeah, I've been reading her autobiography, Crazy is My Superpower, which is a nice encapsulation, I think, of her career in a lot of ways. And yeah, so I was really excited to talk about her, and so we're doing this episode. So the matches we are covering are, first of all, a match that she is not wrestling in, but is the referee in, between Daniel Bryan and CM Punk at the 2012 Money in the Bank pay-per-view in a no disqualification match for the WWE title. Then we are going to cover her match for the Divas title against Caitlyn at Payback 2013. And then we are going to watch the Vicky Guerrero Invitational match for the Divas title from WrestleMania 30, in which AJ is defending her Divas title against pretty much the entire Divas roster at the time. Should I save the names for later?
Save the names for when we.
I would almost say let's save the names for the show notes, because that's gonna take up like 10 minutes. There's like 30 people.
I have literally a paragraph of notes that is just the names.
We'll get to that, I guess.
But yeah, so Punk Bryan, right? Excellent match. CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, two of the best wrestlers in the world then, and whenever they got in the ring together, it was a treat. That being said, this match was about AJ Lee. It was as though they were like, AJ's catching fire as a character. We want to put her in a big main event. How can we do that? And it's like, well, you could have her wrestle a match. No. You can't have her wrestle with another woman? No, we need two guys to wrestle here. Yeah. And we can have her stand there and make faces, which she did. This is what you were talking about. They put her in this box, and she showed that she is bigger than any box they're going to put her in.
Well, and that's this is, this is basically a variation on the same dumb love triangle. The woman
crazy vindictive woman
who she's simultaneously your crazy girlfriend who who knows what she's gonna be, she's so unstable, and then also just an object to be won. And yet, given those constraints, she's still she has agency, she has character, she has I don't know, she does so much with the box of shit they give her.
Absolutely. And at the time, that was the way she found to garner attention, to get over both with The Office and with the crowd. And apparently the original idea for her character was way worse. What she's giving us here, which is still, horribly stereotypical and misogynistic and hackneyed and whatever.
Deeply ableist.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh no. And the characterization of mental illness and is awful. And she does the best you possibly can with it. It was going to be worse. And let me just read a little bit from the autobiography about what, in her own words, what this was like. So she says, some writers had pitched my character would become the crazy ex-girlfriend. At first that sounded intriguing, as I was having fun being the vengeful ex-girlfriend, until I found out what that entailed. The plan was for my crazy to be a point of levity in the show, a series of goofy skits in which this nutter revenge kissed a leprechaun and danced with dinosaurs from outer space. I am not exaggerating, that was an actual plan. We were going to make a joke out of mental illness. Sure, WWE wasn't an after-school special, but after everything I had gone through with not only my mother, her mother suffered from bipolar disorder and never treated it, was kind of the opinion that, admitting you have mental illness is a sign of weakness, and that, it was just not something to be talked about or dealt with at all. But after everything I had gone through with not only my mother but myself, mocking an affliction that deeply affected me was not something I was interested in. 2 months into my first and only real storyline, I turned my bosses down. As a rule of thumb, I'll never say no to something without suggesting an alternative option. It's just a smart thing to do if you want to healthily collaborate with people. So I pitched we take things a darker route. I suggested instead of making the character a caricature of a mentally ill person, why not explore how dangerous that illness could make her? I wanted her to be truly broken, vulnerable, clingy, and downright unsettling. If simply being heartbroken on camera had garnered so much support, embracing the even more extreme flaws humans keep hidden away inside of themselves would be the ultimate catharsis for the audience. Instead, I was taken off television for 2 months as a punishment. But eventually, they did let her do the character, and she says, embracing the side effects of a broken relationship had initially been the catalyst for my connection to the audience, so I knew I had to continue exploring the depths of emotion within me. If I wanted to play crazy more truthfully, I only needed to look in a mirror. I knew what kind of darkness could exist inside of me. Years of living unmedicated had shown me the altered reality my eyes were capable of seeing. I knew exactly how twisted and torn my thoughts could become. Those feelings, though at bay, were only a short trip away. But facing them wasn't easy. I had spent so long ignoring my own bipolar disorder, I was still used to being in denial about it and sometimes untrained in controlling it. Would reaching deep down and pulling it to the surface only serve in helping it to consume me, or would it be the perfect way to hide in plain sight? I had asked to be the face of proper crazy, and now it was my responsibility to do it right. I got in touch with the deep, dark corners of my mind I had tried to never look at for too long. Even in people who don't have bipolar disorder, there are warped desires and perverse instincts they fight to keep hidden. Having bipolar disorder means those instincts jump to the surface without worry of repercussions. I decided that was exactly who I needed to be on screen, an amalgamation of rash, selfish, frightening behavior.
I mean, that seems like a really perfect encapsulation of her relationship with the WWE, where she's like, okay, this is what I want to do, something that is authentic and interesting and meaningful. And they're like, well, what if instead you did something offensive, stupid, and fucking garbage that nobody's going to care about? And then she's like, okay, well, how about instead I do the thing that you're telling me to do because I have to, because it's been my dream to be a wrestler since I was a child and you're my boss, but I do everything in my power to make that as intelligent and authentic and respectful as possible.
Yeah. And what we get is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
Probably her actual vision for it and what they wanted.
Sure. Well, because there's just on a basic level, like the shit that they ask women to do. Like, for one thing that I thought of right off the bat, walking around with your back arched all the time just looks painful. Just looks like it gets really uncomfortable after a while. Like,
and between that and all the sick bumps she takes,
Yeah.
she has spinal problems now, which
Right.
is not surprising given the way she wrestled. And that weird, awkward thing she had to do all the time.
it's like, it's a joke about or something you see a lot in criticisms of, like, the way female comic book characters are drawn and stuff
Right.
like that, where they're in these like ridiculous twisted positions that no human being could actually get into. But then in like WWE, they're like, well, no, but you do kind of need
You
to.
can
You have
see
to
both
stand like
breasts
that.
and entire ass at the same
Yes.
time somehow.
Yeah. That was the priority, I think, for the WWE for a long time. Ass, breasts, ass.
So, yeah.
No. I was just saying, so yes, this is. I mean, it had the potential to just be a dumb love triangle story in the wrong hands, with bad wrestlers. It probably could have been the same trash, but this is now in the upper echelon for me of the 5 or 6 matches that we've watched that I have really, truly enjoyed.
It's a
Yeah.
fun, violent match.
Oh yes, very violent. Lots of plunder.
There's a great moment where Daniel Bryan reverses CM Punk's finisher, the Go to Sleep, into a Hurricane Rana that I really enjoyed. There's the first time that Daniel Bryan does the yes lock submission hold with a kendo stick across CM Punk's face.
That looks very unpleasant.
There's the part where Daniel Bryan has put CM Punk into what seems like an extremely difficult maneuver to do well, and it's almost never done perfectly. The Romero special, where he's got like both legs hooked up with his own legs, and the arms, and he's on his back, and he's got him up in the air.
That was really cool. I've never seen that before.
Sometimes called the surfboard. Lots of people try it. They rarely do. Even Bryan, if the guy is too big, he won't be able to get him all the way up.
Right.
And then even more impressively, they work it so Punk gets one leg free, and while he still has the other leg locked into it, he reaches for the kendo stick and then beats Bryan until he releases the hold.
The balance it takes to do that kind of thing is just unreal.
And that seems like a particularly spectacular example of doing something that you can only pull off if you are collaborating and working together, and it looks like they're fighting, and it really hurts CM Punk, right? Because there's no way, if you're trying to do that to somebody and they don't want it, and they don't want it to happen, it's not going to fucking happen. Like, no matter what position you're in.
These two are just such masters of their craft in the ring. You know, they could have every match they've ever had has just been great.
I don't really know what Punk's politics are like, but then when it started, I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm just on my Twitter feed because I'm watching a tanky and an anarchist beat the shit out of each other. Mostly because the stars on his underwear sort of reminded me of like the Chinese flag or something. So I don't know. I sort of put him in the tanky position. I don't actually know how accurate that is.
It's just Chicago. It's the Chicago flag.
Okay.
He's very Chicago.
I don't think either of them would identify as a socialist. Maybe I think Bryan might be some kind of anarcho-socialist. He probably likes Chomsky. He came out in support of Jill Stein in 2016.
I bet that if you are at a bar with Daniel Bryan and he doesn't think you're gonna like go tell anybody else about, I bet his actual political views are probably a lot more. As somebody who I am constantly uncomfortable expressing the full depth of my political views to people.
Then again, he could just be working us.
Yeah,
he reads a lot. He's very into like growing stuff, and he's a Northwest hippie for all the good and bad that comes with. And Punk is a straight edge punk rocker from Chicago.
His deal is that he's better than you, right? That's generally
the initial character was, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, and that means I'm better than you. And he had evolved his character throughout his career from that. Now when he's done interviews and stuff, he talks about now he's like 41, and he's like he'll refer to old Phil because his real name is Phil. It's like old Phil would have gotten really angry and stayed really angry for a long time. And new Phil doesn't want to do that anymore. And a lot of punk rockers eventually come to that conclusion, like it's not worth it just holding a disdain for everything in the world all day. I'm going to have a heart attack. And then why didn't I do all those drugs if I'm just going to have a heart attack anyway?
He was always better as a heel in that role. It was great having the crowd boo the guy whose thing is just that he doesn't do drugs. But especially, I never thought they'd actually make that a heel in the WWE. And they did. They ran with it, and it was fantastic. He had the Straight Edge Society. That was really good TV.
And it's not so much that they wanted the baby faces to be endorsing doing drugs. When he was feuding with Triple H got the zinger on him that kind of encapsulated what the WWE ideal was. Is Triple H just said to him, you say you don't drink or do drugs. Yeah, neither do I, but I don't have to tell you every time I talk to you.
That's not my deal.
Yeah.
Well, because I think part of what I was thinking with Punk is that, not only is there the straight edge aspect, and that's why he's better than you, but also just like he's a very handsome guy who's really good at wrestling. And I would say, based on what I've seen of all wrestlers so far, I'd be willing to bet he is one of the best actors in the bunch. Like he's in a movie that's out now that we were talking about earlier. And I would be willing to bet that he's like a pretty solid actor, because I just felt like he was communicating more facially and stuff like than pretty much anybody else I had seen so far.
In this match, he's technically the babyface and Bryan the heel, though the crowd is about split between them. This is after WrestleMania 28, when Daniel Bryan lost in 8 seconds. And so even though he was still technically supposed to be the heel, the crowd, who was angry that he wasn't getting booked well as they saw it, was starting to really come around to him. And so he was doing the yes chant, and the crowd was yesing along with him. Eventually, because he stayed heel for a while, he'd start telling them, you can't do the yes chant, I do the yes chant. And then he'd start doing the no chant.
Yeah, this was something of a dream match for serious wrestling fans at the time. Like, had been following both of their careers for a long time. This is the biggest stage this match had been put on by a mile, for the title, no less. It was like a major match. But of course, once again, the main story of the match was AJ Lee, not so much Brian
Right?
Punk.
Yeah. I'm mostly just this is my first real foray into Punk as well.
This is.
so
we're not going to ignore the great match these two guys have and the characters that they played and that they are. The storyline was that Brian and AJ had a relationship going, and Brian was not very nice to her and manipulative, and she was just kind of going along with it because she was being manipulated. Whereas she wanted to be going out with Punk, but Punk kind of turned her down flat anyway, but was still nice to her. And then she was like, but you're nice to me. So, and then
in real life,
it was just kind of a cool reversal of the typical guy getting zoned
Sure.
or whatever.
Yeah.
AJ, so Brian breaks up with AJ after the loss to Sheamus at WrestleMania. And then AJ proposes to CM Punk, and he turns her
in
down.
the middle of the
Wow.
ring on
Middle
Raw.
of the ring, yeah.
The face that Punk pulls is like, sitcom star from the 50s mugging for the camera level. Like, she's asking me to marry her. Oh no, what can I do?
Punk and AJ are now actually married,
Yes.
by the
what
way.
was he saying? Were her and Brian actually
No, I don't
involved?
think so.
Or
No.
that's yeah.
Punk is well known, and it's no secret. Punk had quite a few of the divas over the course of his time in the WWE. He was romantically linked with, and he settled with AJ, and they both just got out of the business together. They were like, "All right, peace."
And
know?
we're done.
AJ
That's that,
dated
yeah.
several men in the business
Yeah,
before
yeah.
Punk too, as you do, right?
As you
'Cause,
do.
Well,
That's
yeah.
the thing
there's-
about any kind of.
It's hard to
Yeah.
be married to someone or be in a relationship with someone who isn't in the business when you're in the business.
Especially when you're on the road,
Well, yeah, that's the thing, and I just imagine that the gulf between wrestlers and any other human being in terms of just what you are doing with your time, the way you are approaching life. I'm sure that every wrestler spouse, I remember, we were talking about Roman Reigns at one point, and somebody was like, "Oh, isn't he a single dad or something?" Which I don't think that's true, but the thought of a wrestler being a single father, no, you should not. You shouldn't be doing that. It's dangerous. I imagine that the loved ones of wrestlers, it's it's like having a loved one in an active war zone. You're just constantly worried about them.
You're waiting for the call saying that they broke something rather significant.
And then I imagine
Mick Foley talks about that a lot in his books, about the toll especially his rough style took on his wife and his kids, more his wife even, because he retired before his kids got particularly old. But he had to both calm down and eventually mostly retired, just partially to save his marriage.
And I'd also imagine just, it's a little bit like how, the Olympic Village is always a fuck fest. If you've got a bunch of kind of weird, unbelievably physically fit people just all in close quarters together, traveling around, going through some weird shit together.
Most of them in their early 20s.
Yeah, people are going to wind up fucking.
But just a couple more things about the match, cool moments. At one point, there's a 2 count, Punk kicks out, and Brian mansplains the 3 count to AJ. He's like, it's 1, 2, 3, all right?
Count faster. And then he immediately gets rolled up and she counts.
That was, yeah.
And there's the great moment where she takes out the chair and it's like, who's she gonna hit it with? Who's she gonna hit with the chair? And then she just throws it in the ring and lets them fight over it.
Right in the middle.
And then the finish is the back suplex through the table and Punk wins it.
Yeah. Now, Oliver, she expresses through her face the entire match, all of the emotions that you're supposed to be paying attention to through the whole match. They take her out at one point and she comes back.
Yeah,
Right,
I was
right,
wondering, I couldn't quite get why that happened.
Well, it was the standard ref bump where oh no, you might be hurt.
Yeah.
And then Brian kept trying to tell them you got to take her away because he didn't want her to be reffing the match because he'd just broken up with her. He wanted a regular referee that he could either just deal with or manipulate to win the match as the heel. So he wasn't happy when she came back either. And
I think it was also, because she commanded so much attention from the crowd, and it was hard to look away from her because of her facial expressions and her reactions, I think they wanted people to actually pay attention to Punk and Bryan for a while.
That makes sense.
Well, they were two of the best wrestlers, that having their dream match.
One of the commentators does say, she craves attention.
Oh, well, just wait until we get into the commentary on one of the other matches.
I wrote a bunch of stuff
Before
down.
that, because of this feud, AJ was was the first woman to ever be on a WWE pay-per-view poster.
Yeah.
She was on the... that can't be true, is that?
I don't know. Sometimes
She
when they
says
have,
something like
all
that
the
in the
faces,
book. It was either the
together.
first time in many, many years,
Like I definitely
or
remember
the first time ever.
I definitely remember WrestleMania posters with Trish Stratus on it.
So yeah, I think it was at least the first time in like 5 or 7 years or something like that. And it's her and Daniel Bryan, and it's the whole thing where like the cartoon old timey villain ties the damsel in distress to
I
the
remember
train
that
tracks,
poster.
but it's AJ has tied Bryan to the train tracks.
that's I enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying. I had a couple like miscellaneous points about this match. One, the back suplex through the table
Yeah.
does not appear to be a thing that would hurt one person more than the other person. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it looks like you're both pretty much getting about the same amount of damage done to you when you go through it.
I think that's the point of the finish, is that it was so close. You know, like it just so happened that Punk landed on top.
Yeah, and I guess you get like, I guess it does 5 fewer HP damage if you're on top and on bottom.
They did have a rematch, right? They had another match the next month.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which one of them this one was actually.
There's a
So
point.
I was surprised by the finish.
There's a point where they're fighting out in the, I guess, like the ramp that
the
goes
ramp.
back, and Punk throws Bryan into the barricade. And I'm always amazed at how acceptable it is for fans to touch the wrestlers, even at this level of wrestling. But he throws Bryan at him, and, some people are like, touching him and doing all this stuff in a sort of like, oh my God, I'm touching Daniel Bryan. This is amazing. But there's a woman on his left side who just kind of does this very gentle, like, hey, you got this, man, kind of shoulder pat. That was really just like, oh, there you go. You're going to get this. And I thought that was very nice.
One of the real appeals to pro wrestling is you can go see it live, and like if you are of the means to get good seats, you can be that close to the wrestlers. Now, you probably shouldn't reach out and touch the wrestlers. If you're gonna, that's about as much as you should. But yeah, it's like you see these people on television, and that makes it really real.
Yeah.
You can't, be inches away from Wolverine or
Captain America or whatever.
So here's an example where you can I can see that. And then my only other point for this is, this general point. I like the idea of a ref that has their own agenda.
Yeah.
I've seen a few matches with guest refs, but those guest refs are usually there to either like Stone Cold, so he can just stunner whoever is left at the end of the match.
Classic.
He's good at that.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's like somebody who's brought in so like they have more HP than the regular kind of ref. But this is the first time I've seen a guest ref or a ref that is also an established character in their own right, who they have their own view on the match and they have their own desires and agenda related to the match, and I thought it made a really interesting counterpoint, and I would love to see more stuff like that.
And that's different, I'd like to point out, than having the crooked ref, where the ref is in the pocket of one or the other competitors.
Which is another thing that has been done well, and
yeah.
It would be interesting for you to see that eventually. Maybe some Danny Davis stuff.
Oh, I got so excited, but I thought you were going to say Danny DeVito.
No. But
he had that one match on Always Sunny.
Oh, that episode, that's like the best episode.
Oh, is that
of
the one
Always
with Roddy
Sunny.
Piper?
Yes.
Where Roddy Piper.
I'm the trash man.
All right. Roddy Piper owes like $15 to somebody. I gotta say, I fell off Always Sunny because I got kind of tired of it.
On.
But I feel like enough people have told me that like they're like, look, like maybe like season 7 or something is weak, but they're like, it really comes back strong in the later years. So I got to get back into it.
It was always a hard show to binge.
Yeah.
It's like after a while, it's like they're such fucking assholes. I just can't deal with it.
I've only seen like a dozen episodes. I've loved all of them, but I've never seen an episode of Always Sunny and thought, man, let me watch 5 more.
Well, because it has the problem that a lot of comedy, and I'm going to bring this back to wrestling, but it has the problem that a lot of comedy, especially in the 2000s, did a lot of comedy that I love, like Curb Your Enthusiasm or something like that, where after a while of that style being popular, I started to be like, man, I really need to see a comedy about an asshole where they experience consequences for their actions. Like this
I
is
mean,
really
that's not what life is actually like.
no,
but
of course
still.
not. Like I
That's why you want the fantasy.
great example of that is the show Vice Principals. I thought Danny McBride stuff in general, I feel like he does a good job of being an asshole who then experiences consequences and has to grow somewhat as a result. And I guess, you know what? I fucking lied. I'm not bringing it back to wrestling at all. I just wanted to talk about shows that I like.
So let's move along then to some matches
Yes.
AJ was an active participant in.
Yes,
We're
yes.
kind of going in chronological order here.
Right.
By this next match, which would be AJ versus Caitlyn for the Divas Championship, this is one of the first times that they had a match like this on one of their shows. And I don't just mean like a one-on-one match with the women. This is like they had finally started to lift the restrictions and saying, okay, if you want to wrestle like the men, you can wrestle like the men, and so they do. Caitlyn was pretty good. She was not a brilliant wrestler like some of the women that they
She
have
was
now.
green as grass.
Yeah, but her and AJ had trained together so much that they knew what they were going to do, and she played her part as like the heavy in the match very well.
So they were really, really good friends right off the bat. They met when they were doing the NXT reality show that they were both on. And AJ was the, indie wrestler who worked her ass off to get into the business, for years and years. Caitlyn was the fitness model that they hired to be a big star.
Yeah, she was a bodybuilder.
And so they were, polar opposites, but just happened to hit it off and became great friends immediately. Caitlyn ended up winning that season of NXT. And then they went on to team as the Chick Busters, at one point, AJ was dating this guy, Trent Beretta, who was in a team called the Dude Busters. So they became the Chick Busters. They teamed for a while because of what this whole love triangle with Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, which had turned AJ heel. That damaged her relationship with Caitlyn, which led to their feud.
AJ does some really cool shit that then a lot of the women's matches that we have seen that take place after her career, I see women doing this, and I don't know if it's something that AJ pioneered herself or if it's just a thing that you would naturally do if you are wrestling and you have a smaller and lighter frame. But there are a lot more like submission holds where she is entirely on the other person and all of her weight is on that person. It was sort of like in the Charlotte Flair, Ronda Rousey, Becky Lynch match that we watched too, where they're like one wrestler will be entirely on top of the other and the other one is walking around with them on it, like trying to like shake them off and like, rearing back and slamming her into the ring to try to get her off. And I don't know, it feels a lot more like not just kinetic, but there is a lot more, I guess, sort of playing with that weight and like wrapping yourself around somebody and trying to get them in that I see a lot of the women wrestlers do, and it's really, really interesting to watch, and it's a really substantially different thing that I feel like I don't see happen in men's matches.
Well, AJ didn't invent that. You do see stuff like that more often in certain Japanese style matches, but really it's a good kind of move to do when you're a lot smaller than your opponent. And a wrestler like AJ Lee, who's so small that even like by women's wrestling standards, she's tiny. It would behoove her to put in her arsenal holds like that, where you have to hold all of her weight. I think, did Muta do holds like that, I think?
Yeah, maybe.
The Great Muta.
Great Muta,
Yeah.
Keiji Muto. But on that note, so, Caitlyn's strength is her strength,
Yeah.
her power, and she's extremely powerful. She throws AJ around a bunch. She does this cool fireman's carry roll with her. AJ speaking of the Black Widow, her finisher where she wraps herself around her opponent, she gets into the Black Widow a couple of really cool ways. There's one where Caitlyn picks her up for a slam and sort of swings her around, and she swings around into the Black Widow. And then the finish of the match, she evades Caitlyn's charge into the corner. Caitlyn crashes into the turnbuckle, and then from that position, AJ rolls down and wraps her into the Black Widow, and that's when she taps.
Yeah, there's in all of the matches with AJ I've seen so far, there's such a cool. It's hard to describe. It's just like the particular combination of high flying spots and quick reversals and stuff that it has a really different rhythm that is really really captivating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as great as this match is, it's still steeped in bullshit.
Oh, Jerry fucking Lawler.
Yeah, so
no.
to begin with, there's the storyline leading into it with the fucking secret admirer shit.
Oh yeah, what was that?
That was just the story they were.
So
they
the
were
story
doing.
for weeks was that Caitlyn had a secret admirer that, you know, despite her being a big star on TV, like, this is like, she's fucking head over heels for this person she's never met. And then it turns out that the secret admirer was AJ's bodyguard, Big E Langston.
Who's great in and of himself, by the way. That's a whole other
Yeah.
story.
And so he, you know, ultimately is revealed as the secret admirer, shoves Caitlyn down, rejects her, and Caitlyn is crying and heartbroken over it. Caitlyn does a lot of crying. Like at the end of the match, they still always make the women win or lose. They always fucking cry.
I think Sasha Banks is just a crier.
Maybe
Some people are just criers. I watched the Table for Three, I think, with Natty Neidhart and some people. She cries like twice. And at one point, she just says, like, I cry a lot. Deal with it. It's
You know,
like,
and once again, this is something that if the dudes were crying, right? If
Randy Orton just started a tear coming down his
at
face.
the end of the match, the Big Show just bursts into tears.
Yeah, it's
like,
funny you mentioned
know,
that. They have made the Big Show cry a couple of times of
Really?
all the guys.
You know,
Yeah.
because it's clearly the most hilarious of.
right.
Shawn Michaels cried when he won his first WWF title, right? The boy who dreamed had been realized.
I think he tried and couldn't actually get a cry out. You could see him like scrunch his face, like,
I mean,
and it doesn't quite have. I'm sure he was dehydrated after the Iron Man match.
Shawn Michaels also was clearly not bound to the same gender roles that the rest of us are. So.
So yeah, it's the worst possible fucking announce team you could want calling this match. Michael Cole, who's, you know, I mean, he's not great. He has his moments.
He sells you Big Macs the entire time.
Yeah. But he's got Jerry Lawler and JBL, and
Is that the really deep voice guy?
Is JBL,
JBL?
the Texan?
The Texas
Yeah,
accent,
okay.
Who's a fucking he's a great heel, but an evil motherfucker. And what is Lawler says? All women despise each other.
I think Jerry Lawler said, I can read women, but I prefer the Braille version.
Whoa.
Yeah, right.
And then-
Wow, that's like
Still.
a really gross thing that's not funny, but he clearly put a lot of thought into like how to.
JBL's all like, well, you know, crazy people can be manipulative,
Yeah.
and
She needs a spanking was one thing that.
Oh,
Lawler
right,
says
yeah.
at one
Caitlyn
point.
rips her
right.
belt off, and
Yeah.
so in the fucking we watched a match for one of the premium episodes with Shawn Michaels and Triple H. We'll probably watch a whole bunch of belt whippings at some point. Never when one man is about to whip another man has an announcer said, oh yeah, he needs a good spanking.
Oh,
I mean,
and-
maybe not never, but rarely.
And you know, they didn't even do the belt whipping in this match. AJ wrapped her studded belt around her fist and punched Caitlyn in the face, which is much better, I might
Yeah,
add.
way better.
That's how you fight with a belt.
Triple H did that to Shawn Michaels actually in
Yeah.
that
Did he?
match too. Yeah.
Ah.
With the big belt buckle.
With the big
Anyway.
belt buckle, right,
But
and
yeah.
covered in blood. And okay.
But yeah, I mean, despite that, like, I actually don't really have a ton of notes about this match because I just sort of thought it was a good match. Like,
was.
I was really entertained the whole time. I thought their characters were very clear.
And they fit together very well.
I mean, it was a hell of a carry job on AJ's part.
Yeah.
Caitlyn wasn't bad, but she was very new, and AJ was a ring general, and
Yeah.
she made a really great match out of having, you know, a fairly limited partner to work with. Caitlyn has recently returned briefly to wrestling. She was in the Mae Young Classic last year, and I thought she made a good showing of herself. I don't know if we'll see more of her.
I believe she's wrestling somewhere in South America now. There's starting to be more and more like South American wrestling. I don't know too many of the details. I know there's like a Chilean league that's popping up. I believe there's a Peruvian league that's popping up. I have to look further into that.
This feud lasted several months after this match. I picked this one because when I looked at all like the top 10 AJ Lee matches, this one is always number one.
Yeah. Well, it was the match that proved to everybody that she could have a traditional singles match and carry it as a title match without all the diva stuff on top of it.
And so for this one, and I know this really was the very first time ever, at least on the main roster, and I think maybe the very first time ever in general, they had a contract signing, which is a wrestling trope. They do contract signings all the time for the rematch between Kayla. And it was the first time that a women's match had a contract signing on TV.
And so AJ Lee, she's like stone cold out of the business, can't wrestle. Like her shit is too
probably
fucked up.
could if she wanted to. No, she left. CM Punk left. And she was married to him, and like if she really wanted to, she probably could have like toughed the storm of that out. But after a few more months, like her contract was coming up, and she just didn't resign. They treated her fine character-wise on television, but it couldn't have been fun being backstage. She made money, he made money. Both of them should have made a lot more money than they did, and they just kind of, they retreated to their place in Chicago and read comic books to each other for the next few years. It's a beautiful story.
And she accomplished everything she could ever possibly want to.
Yeah.
I mean, as we'll talk about in the next match, she had a match at WrestleMania. First of all, she defended the Divas title. The first time a women's title was defended at WrestleMania in 7 years. The first time ever the Divas title was defended at WrestleMania. She defeated the entire roster in one match, then went on the next year to soundly defeat the Bella Twins, who were her biggest rivals, in a match, passed the torch to Paige. And then and after working with Paige, all these other women from NXT hadn't come up yet, so she really didn't have anyone else to work with. So she was like, "Fuck it, I'm out of here."
A lot of their top women did that, except AJ was special. She was like better than most of them, but they hit a ceiling, and the ceiling was really low in the WWE because even when you were the champion, you were still like not secondary. You were like way down the card. Stacy Keibler, who got a lot of mainstream attention. She's on Dancing with the Stars and everything. She left, and people were shocked when she said like she only made like $150K a year or something because she was on television every week, and like she made more money being a D-list actress. Things have changed now, and very recently have those changes finally happened. But there was no place else for AJ to go.
And I guess also just the fact that you physically could, in theory, continue wrestling does not mean that you should.
No.
And I could definitely see somebody being like, hey, you know what? I'm only a little fucked up, so I'm going to get out now.
And, I really respect her and CM Punk for being, for not giving in to the kind of pressure, the desire for greater fame, the need to have that attention on them anymore.
Constantly.
Which almost every wrestler in history seems to have, where they just can't give it up. I mean, of course, Punk is kind of back now.
Well, Punk is now on as the time of this recording, and it's still a big kind of wrestling news story. Punk is in the show that the WWE is putting on FS1, which is like a sports style analysis show. He has a contract directly with Fox. He does not have a deal with the WWE, but Fox wanted CM Punk because they thought he'd be a good analyst. And it's his job basically to go on that show and be like, this was bad this week, with no consequences from the WWE on it, which is kind of a dream job of his, I think.
As I mentioned in a previous episode, he was a commentator on one season of Netflix's obstacle course athletic show Ultimate Beastmaster, and was quite entertaining.
He's going to be back in the ring, though.
Well, they asked him, like, what about another match? And he's like, there's a lot of barriers between that. I won't say, like, never, but, like, we'll see. And really what he means is they have to pay him a lot of money.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and
this is
it's
about...
like, he had said, like, people are acting like, oh, Punk sold out. He always said they weren't paying me what I'm worth. If they want to pay me like an elite athlete gets paid when they're being employed by $1 billion company, I'll come back and do it.
Yeah,
I won't do it until they're literally paying me. Brock Lesnar makes that much money. Why aren't I making that much money?
You know what isn't selling out? An artist who's given their entire life to their art, who's who's incredibly good at it, trying to make low six figures. Trying to make like 250, 300 grand. That's not fucking selling out.
We'll do some Punk episodes in
Yes,
the future.
yeah.
This is
Sorry,
the
I
AJ
keep
episode.
yeah.
And
Sorry,
on that point, part of the reason I think she left was they kept chanting CM Punk at her when she came out.
Really?
Well,
Oh,
they wanted Punk back.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, they
God.
were doing that over a lot of people's matches at the time.
They still do,
They
yeah.
still do. Punk leaving was part of what was ripping the WWE asunder.
Yeah, after she left, AJ did some like animal rights outreach stuff
Yep,
and
yep.
some like
That's awesome.
mental health outreach stuff.
She's
and-
real cool.
Yeah.
I so respect the attempt to balance, like they're trying to put her into the, crazy character. It made me think a lot about like 90s movie villains and like crazy and what crazy meant for so long. I'm making quotation marks. The guys are giving me looks about it. And like what that meant for so long. Like some of her facial expressions kind of reminded me of like there's a million examples, a million terrible tropes of this. The one that came to mind most immediately was Gary Oldman in The Professional.
Yeah.
But just like it's such a cartoonish, offensive, fucking stupid and insensitive idea of crazy, and her taking that and really trying to use her own experience to make it something more, just like something that's not a caricature, something that's still meaningful, that would be meaningful for some kid watching it who is suffering from real mental illness and can see a representation of that on television that's not some sort of caricature.
Imagine if, like, one day wrestling could have a genuine, authentic storyline with a character struggling with mental illness that wasn't a caricature at all, and that was just a real deep dive into what that's like. That would be fucking cool. Come on, book it, dudes.
Now we get Eugene.
Oh, we'll show you Eugene. That'll be a bad match one of these days.
He was a fine wrestler.
Who was Eugene?
He was a
They always
cognitively disabled
Oh,
They-
God.
character.
They
Oh,
always
God.
referred to him only as very special.
Oh,
The character
Christ.
became like he was a wrestling savant where he like did the caricature backstage and they put him in the ring and he knew all these holds and stuff. A fine technical wrestler. His career was never the same before or after.
what year was
Mid
that?
2000s.
Okay.
You know.
Little later than you'd think.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they were a bit behind the times.
So,
Okay, so the
yeah.
last match we're going to talk about, the Vicky Guerrero Invitational, featuring
Excuse me.
Summer Rae versus Eva Marie versus Naomi of the Funkadactyls versus Cameron of the Funkadactyls versus Alicia Fox versus Oksana versus Natalia versus Emma versus Brie Bella versus Nikki Bella versus Layla versus Rosa Mendez versus Tamina versus Divas champion AJ Lee. And here's the thing. They would do this all the time. They would put all the fucking divas into one match. I remember Survivor Series match, 5-on-5 elimination matches that lasted 3 minutes. The whole match was just like finisher pinfall, finisher pinfall, finisher pinfall, and they do the fucking...
Just to get everyone on the show, you know.
you can hear Vince being like, "Oh, let's just get it all out of the way at once. Let's get all the ladies out of the way."
Here was the worst part about this particular match. They put it on as the match immediately after The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak was broken by Brock Lesnar.
Wow.
You could not have a
That's-
more dead, fucking uninterested crowd.
I mean,
then-
somebody had to follow that match, but yeah, it really didn't have to be
And
this.
I'll
Get a
say it
little
a fucking again. This is the first time they defended a women's title on WrestleMania since WrestleMania 23, and this was WrestleMania 30.
Well, one of the things that I thought was such a bummer about this match is that there's a lot of cool shit going on. Like everybody's doing something interesting, but it's like eating a dish that's been prepared with all herbs and spices known to man, where there might be some really cool combinations of things happening there, but it's just a wash. It just comes out as a wash.
Salt and pepper and thyme and cinnamon, and it's like, wait, why are you mixing the thyme and the cinnamon? Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
There were
Like,
some
well, her finisher's the cinnamon, and this is her payday this year. Just put her in the match.
There were some stupid fucking spots too. There's the one where like 5 people do a suplex and they all cover it once, and the referee's like 1, 2, and then like maybe some of them kick out, and he doesn't know who to look at.
The
and-
ref looks very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Let's just zoom out for a sec. What is this? What is happening here?
They don't do a good job of explaining it at all.
It's not a battle royal.
No.
It's not an elimination match. There's one fall.
One fall to a finish.
There's no tags.
What is
The
Vicky
story-
Guerrero's role?
Vicky Guerrero was the general manager of SmackDown at this point? Was this SmackDown or Raw? It doesn't matter. She was the
Raw, I think maybe.
She was the general manager of one of the shows, and she was feuding with AJ Lee. And it was your standard wrestling champion is in trouble with the authority figure angle they've done a million times. And he's like, well, to stack the odds against you, AJ, you're going to defend the title against everybody. First fall takes it. And that was the way they got the entire Divas division on WrestleMania that year.
You have in the past referred to, so I've seen Vicky Guerrero one time before, and she was like incapacitated at the time. You had referred to her at the time as like, oh, she became one of like the greatest wrestling villains.
She's a
and I
great
had
heel.
no idea what to expect or anything. And she's great. The
Just
fight.
excuse me.
I'm getting yelled at by my principal.
Right,
like,
exactly.
Yeah.
She was great at the house shows. She would come out and start, because she'd have as much time as she wanted to scream at everyone and whip them up and weep them up and then get pissed at them for not going along. And just, she's just dynamite. They need to put her in the Hall of Fame like now.
Major big principal energy.
Yeah.
Right there.
So a couple more things. By the way, not only was this the first time that they had defended the Divas title at WrestleMania, it was the only time because it was retired. The next year was that tag team match that we already covered between the Bellas and AJ and Paige. And then the next year, they got rid of the stupid fucking Divas thing and just made it the women's title. The fucking butterfly, gaudy butterfly Barbie belt.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Now, they still have like a battle royal on WrestleMania every year with most of the women in it, but they also have a battle royal with most of the men, all the ones that aren't otherwise on the card, and they actually have other women's matches on the card. What a concept, you know?
Well, that's once again, like going back to the frustrating thing about this being that a lot of what is happening in the ring is actually pretty cool and there's some good wrestling, is that it feels like they could have taken everybody in this match and made an entire fucking pay-per-view out just pairing them off or like having, like 2 or 3 at a time, and it would have been really good because it seems like everybody here is good.
Almost. There's plenty of talent in there.
Okay, yeah, I guess it was hard to tell.
I have a few
everyone has at
specific.
least one good move.
Yeah.
Well, almost everyone.
Most of them.
Remember, Eva Marie
is
is in this match.
as is Rosa Mendez.
Rosa Mendez actually, she did the like side slam thing,
Yeah,
and
she did
it
the
wasn't
one
horrible.
move. It was
She didn't
okay.
botch it completely.
And then Emma does the move,
yeah.
but the commentator calls it the Emma sandwich.
Right.
because he didn't get the joke.
Because he
And
wasn't watching NXT, and she had just come to the main roster,
the proper name is the Emmamite sandwich,
which also is kind of a reference that nobody in America gets.
And is sort of a stretch, even if you do get it.
Yeah.
I will
yeah,
say.
for sure. And she also does the dilemma. She gets both of her puntastic moves in there.
But it does kind of remind me of like if you upset somebody from California and then like they react in a way where you're like, you don't seem mad. I understand that you are mad, but you are not capable of really expressing being angry, because if you're from the West Coast, you're raised to only really express a handful of emotions, and they're all positive.
Dude, you don't get it. I'm seething right now.
So
as opposed to on the East Coast, where we're taught to express 6 emotions, almost all of which are negative.
Oh yeah, to the car that's halfway into the crosswalk.
fuck you.
Yeah.
The Bellas,
I love New York.
the Bellas get their shine in this one. The Bella Twins get their shine in this one. They kind of botched the first double team move they hit.
Not the Bellas.
But then the other two are pretty good. They do like a drop kick combo and then like a dive thing. I want to mention it because I didn't mention it on the premium episode from a couple weeks ago where we talked about the Bellas. Brie Bella's got this thing called Brie mode. It's part of her theme music. It's on her t-shirt. When she fires up, she goes, Brie mode. But the origin of that is from Total Divas. Brie mode was the name for when she got drunk and belligerent and out of hand on the show.
I mean, that's a little bit what you want your wrestling character to be, right? Steve Austin was basically just in Steve Austin mode 24/7.
And I think Daniel Bryan kind of judged her for it because like he's pretty clean and whatever. He's real kind of judgy on Total Divas.
Maybe he's leaning into the vegan character because that's like society's perception of how vegans are. Even though thousands, hundreds, if not thousands of vegans I have met over the course of my life, and 2 or 3 of them were like that. I
think he's just probably kind of judgmental. He's probably kind of a snob, you know. I grow my own vegetables, thank you. You know, and it's not that
I
he's
have
like
a
malicious
compost toilet.
You know, we may have mentioned this on the podcast before. You know, somebody burglarized his house and he personally chased them down on foot and put them in a hold. And they were so lucky it was him and not another world-class wrestler who might have wanted to hurt them. He was just worried that this guy hurt like their pet. And he just held them till the cops showed up.
And I get if you grow your own vegetables and a composting toilet and you're the greatest wrestler on the planet, like
Right.
you're probably gonna have like a bit of a thing about it.
So Eva Marie is in this match. You might have noticed her. She had the like red, deep, bright red hair.
I think so.
And she also didn't do anything.
I remember
athletic.
a lot. I honestly remember a lot more of the footwear, of the crazy boots that people were wearing.
So Eva Marie might be the worst wrestler they've ever had. They
Wow.
tried with her. Well, they tried with her for so long, and she just didn't get any better. They gave her own personal trainer in Brian Kendrick, and she still didn't get any better.
Yeah, she was
Is
a
it just
bad
did she
wrestler.
have a really impressive look or
Oh,
something?
she's
fun,
hot.
She was very
from
good on Total
traditional
Divas, is also what
standards.
it is.
She good, I guess.
Well, she was on the show for several years.
Yeah,
I
she was
presume the
popular.
People who watched Total Divas found worth in her.
But she really represents the end of the Divas era. She was the last person who couldn't wrestle that they thought was hot, and so they just tried to force into a wrestling role, and it didn't work, and that was it. After that, like it was over for that.
Yeah, the fans were not accepting it anymore. They wanted women who are women wrestlers wrestling. And that's because it's on the wrestling show, right? Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing how long it fucking took to get there.
So yeah, Alicia Fox looks really good in this match. She does her big scissor kick, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Natalia is always good, though. There's this thing they always do with Natalia. She does her spinning clothesline thing, and they're like, just like her daddy, Jim the Anvil Neidhart. Now, first of all, they don't refer to any male wrestler's father as their daddy.
No.
And 2, Jim the Anvil Neidhart didn't do that move.
Yeah, I can't remember him
Wow.
ever doing that move.
He did a clothesline.
Yeah,
She fucking, I mean, she's not the first person to do that move. She calls it the natty go round. But no, she decided to do that herself. It is not a tribute to her fucking father.
I was very actively blocking out the commentators at this point.
good.
I was like, I don't even want to know what they're saying. Also, I didn't think that there was really going to be anything like said by the 30 people wrestling in the ring that was before, so I kind of had the volume down on this. Also, a lot of times I have the volume down because I'm afraid that my neighbors will hear me watching all this wrestling all the time.
You're getting
I'll
being a
admit
wrestling
that.
fan.
We are wrestling Americans, okay? We are discriminated against.
I remember, like, wrestling is a little more accepted in, like, the nerd and geek community these days. I remember back in the day, you'd go to, like, nerd cons before nerd cons were a thing, and you still had to, like, go into the corner with your wrestling friends, like, wrestling?
I guess it took a long time for nerds to realize that wrestling fans are also nerds.
I don't know why it took nerds so long to realize that not only was wrestling fake, but wrestling fans knew it was.
Well,
Come on.
I think wrestling fans for a long time, maybe in like the 80s and before, actually were like more like jocks.
Yeah.
We're more sports fans. We're like just mean and and bullies and stuff like that. I think the generation of nerdy wrestling fans started with us.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, if you go all the way back, like if you watch wrestling from the 50s, it's treated like a big boxing event. You look at the people in the front row; they're all wearing like suits and dresses and like their hats and so on.
There's an issue of Neil Gaiman's Death comic book where the hero of the comic, who's like a teenage kid, meets Death, and he's like, I don't want to live in a world with the World Wrestling Federation. You know? That's what Neil Gaiman was. That was his judgment of pro wrestling at the time.
I guess it's also something where like I was talking to a friend of mine this past weekend who I was visiting a mutual friend of Doc and I, and he asked, he was like, oh, so how is the podcast going? I'm like, oh, it's going pretty well. I'm enjoying it so far. And he's like, yeah, because, how do you feel about wrestling? And I'm like, look, I think it doesn't take a lot of work to get to the point where you are sort of begrudgingly like, there's a lot more going on than I would have thought. It's a lot more interesting than I would have thought. And a big part of that is the things that make wrestling interesting, the other information that you need to obtain in order to watch a match and have an idea of what's going on is not information you will ever be able to get from watching wrestling. It's really, it's almost like an oral tradition.
Yeah.
A friend of yours, who knows about it, has to sit down with you and explain how it's like jazz. You know what I mean? Like if you just play somebody a jazz record and they have no frame of reference for it, they're going to be like, there's no lyrics. There's nothing for me to
What's
latch
this
on
noodling?
to. Like, why are they, I don't understand. Like, it seems very egotistical in that it's like the soloing. And then you have to explain like the intellectual tradition behind it and how the musicians are interacting with each other and all this stuff. And it's stuff that you'll never be able to glean just if you're in the wild absorbing it by yourself.
You need to be initiated. And the interesting thing in it, and I noticed this with people who also didn't grow up reading comic books, like people who don't like wrestling that I know can't look at it. They sit down to watch it for 30 seconds and they just get like frustrated and walk away. They don't know how to watch it.
Yeah.
And I know people who didn't grow up reading comic books who don't know how to read comics. They look at it and they don't understand where their eyes are supposed to go. They don't understand whether they're supposed to read the words first or look at the pictures. And for those of us who grew up with comics, you just read them.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, and I fucking 100% admit to falling into this trap myself, but with both comic books and wrestling, there is a real classism. There is a real, people look down on it, and I absolutely fuck it. That's the genesis of this podcast was like, I really look down on this thing, but I also respect you guys. This creates a dissonance for me. So sort of the very one of the broad inspirations for this podcast was the great Analyze Fish podcast between Scott Aukerman and the late great comedian Harris Whittles, in which Scott Aukerman's like, so, you're a person that I respect whose work is fantastic, and yet you also love the band Fish, and I just fucking can't make sense of this, so I need you to explain it to me. And I think that, people will watch wrestling and like, you don't know how it works, but and you don't know how to watch it or what to look for, but you do know that it looks like other things that you hate, and you think about the people you have known in your life who like wrestling, and a lot of times, wrestling is a real, it is something that appeals to, not to make everything about class, but it appeals to the working class of America. It appeals to, the, people who, I don't even know
the cognitively disabled as well too. Like anyone can watch wrestling.
Yes,
and that's kind of cool about it, is it's universal.
One of the WWE's big charity partners is Make-A-Wish. Like the single person who has done more Make-A-Wish wishes is John Cena. I'm not sure if he's up to 500. But kids in the Make-A-Wish program love John Cena because he's their fantasy. And that's that.
And you're right. Like, there is something about, the derisive way to talk about it is to say that something is basic. But, really it just means, if it it can appeal to people on multiple levels. And I think, even for us, we love the postmodern aspects of wrestling and how it blends reality and fantasy and you never really know what the truth is, and you're never really gonna know everything. But also it's just fucking big guys slamming into each other, and you shouldn't act like you're better than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
same thing. Are you too? It's like being too good for a fart joke. It's a lot of fart jokes are dumb, but if they're masterfully done, it's great. And if you can't let yourself do that, then I don't know. If you can't let yourself enjoy that, then it's your loss.
So last thing about this last match, the Vicky Guerrero Invitational, AJ eventually wins the match by tapping out Naomi to the Black Widow. I just wanted to point out that AJ and Naomi had quite a history together. They started out in Florida Championship Wrestling, which eventually became NXT, the WWE's developmental promotion together. I think the first AJ Lee match I ever saw was against Naomi in FCW. And I think it might be interesting for us to watch that match eventually, because we can see what AJ was like before she was produced by the WWE at all. So she beats Naomi. She beats the entire Divas division. She really clears the deck for what was to come with the development of women's wrestling over the next several years.
Yeah, the only real shame is that she didn't stick around to see it. If she had stuck around another couple of years, not only would she be really in the mix with all these amazing women, she probably would have gotten paid a lot more once the pay scale went up, which was a concern. Same thing with CM Punk. If he really wanted that Mania main event, if he stuck around another couple of years, he probably would have gotten it. Of course, there's way more to it than just, they left too early. Those are two very complicated stories that are ongoing, of course. And yeah, but she had reached the top. She had held the top spot. And I don't just mean, she won the title. She held it. It was hers to hold and hers to give away. And she left because when you've accomplished everything you can do in your field, it's time to move on, right? These days, I like it when Trish Stratus comes back and has a couple of matches, because she had clearly hit the top of the field herself and held it for a few years. And she's still in fantastic shape. She could still work a match whenever she wants. And you can tell when she comes back how happy she is that all the women are finally starting to get their due. And they have Beth Phoenix now doing a commentary on NXT. It's been pointed out that as much as Beth Phoenix has been retired for years and they put her in the Hall of Fame, she's younger than Shayna Baszler.
That's what was so fucking frustrating about Hulk Hogan all those years, that he just refused to give up the top spot.
Yeah.
And it must have been really frustrated for all the women when the fabulous Moolah was the only game in town for 30 years.
The only game in town, yeah. And to zoom out a little more on that, John Cena is gracefully stepped aside to let other people try and take the top spot. He comes back and has a match now and again, but he hasn't held the top for years now, and he could. Just like Hogan, he could come back tomorrow. He could call up Vince. He could be like, Vince, decided you should put me on the sheet. Look, the old joints don't work so much anymore, so I'm going to be real limited. So give me the title at Mania. Good stuff.
He's now officially, because they don't recognize some of them, tied with Ric Flair for most world title reigns. And if he wanted to, he could be like, hey, I want that. Yeah. There was actually a match with Seth Rollins and John Cena where Jon Stewart interfered to cost John Cena the match because he didn't want him to defeat Ric Flair's record.
Stewart's a big wrestling fan.
Wow. All right, final thoughts?
AJ was great. If she ever comes back, I'll be happy. And if she doesn't, I'll be happy for her.
She's from Union City, New Jersey, just like our friend Spoon.
Fuck yeah.
Shout out to
right
Spoon,
across
Union
the Hudson
City.
right there.
Yep.
This was AJ Lee is a fantastic wrestler. I'm really glad we delved into this. I wouldn't have thought to ask about her, so I'm glad you guys made the call that we're going to do an AJ Lee episode.
Well, she wasn't
so
around
awesome.
for that long compared to some of the real pillars of wrestling because she got out, but her influence is still felt very much. She kind of started to break the walls down, saying we want actual women's wrestling.
Read Crazy is my superpower. It's a really good read. It's a really interesting look into the wrestling business.
I may download the audio version on a service that should give us money to mention their name.
Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling. Follow us on Twitter @ContestingW. Follow me on Twitter @Evan Burke, etc. That's Evan Burke, ETC.
Follow me on Twitter @Dr. Diamondfire. It's Dr. Diamondfire. At me, send me messages, book me on your shows as a commentator, or a ring announcer, or even a wrestler. And continue listening to Contesting Wrestling.
Follow me, Dr. Ben Abelson, on Twitter and Instagram @ScribeBen. Patreon.com/Contesting Wrestling, where you can get premium episodes, regular episodes in advance, probably some other cool stuff eventually.
Thank you. We love you.